If you want to know how the Eagles did against the Pittsburgh Steelers, you don't need to look much farther than the final drive of the game. The Pittsburgh Steelers punted the ball away with 10 minutes and 29 seconds, and the Philadelphia Eagles used that time to go on a 21-play drive that netted 88 yards, and the Steelers never saw the ball again as the Philadelphia Eagles rose to victory with a final score of 27-13. Welcome to the Bird's Nest Podcast. I'm Joe Donahue. Thank you so much for joining us. The Philadelphia Eagles cruised to victory in the battle for Pennsylvania against the Pittsburgh Steelers, their opponents from across the turnpike. And except for the second quarter, where the Steelers were the most competitive, the Philadelphia Eagles really controlled this game. And it started from the very beginning. The Philadelphia Eagles drew first blood in the game. They were able to go down the field, score a field goal. They wound up scoring a touchdown. And at the end of the first quarter, they were up by that touchdown. Meanwhile, the Pittsburgh Steelers, on their first 5 drives, couldn't put together a drive that went more than 3 plays. And the Eagles turned the ball over twice in that first quarter. The Eagles fumbled the ball. Jalen Hurts fumbled the ball on a run. The Steelers went 3 and out. They punted the ball away. Cooper DeJean fumbled the ball deep in Eagles territory, recovered by the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Steelers were only able to get a field goal out of that off of their next 3 plays. So it was not a good first quarter in terms of those kinds of mistakes, but the Eagles' defense did a heck of a job keeping the Eagles' offense in the game early, because the game did have the potential to get out of hand quickly. Meanwhile, the Eagles' offense just played tremendously. Jalen Hurts, 25 for 32, 290 yards in the passing game, 2 touchdowns. He finished with a passer rating of 125.3. At one point in the game, especially through the first quarter, he had a perfect passer rating, so take that for what you will. The Eagles didn't have quite as much productivity in the run game. Saquon Barkley had 19 carries for just 65 yards. Jalen Hurts, 15 carries for 45 yards. Kenny Gainwell, 7 carries for 20 yards. Devontae Smith also got on the run statistics, 1 carry for 1 yard. But that was also to be expected a little bit. The Pittsburgh Steelers' run defense going into this game was 4th in the league in terms of total yards allowed on the ground. That's actually better than the Eagles' defense statistically going into this game. So it makes sense that the Eagles weren't able to produce quite as much on the ground as they were through the air. The Eagles wound up dominating in other statistics offensively as well. The Philadelphia Eagles had 401 total net offensive yards. They dominated in the time of possession battle, which makes sense if you're going to end the game with a 10.5-minute drive. The Eagles had the ball for a grand total of 39 minutes and 52 seconds. So the Eagles had the ball for about 2/3 of the game, which is going to put the Steelers at a huge disadvantage if the Steelers aren't holding on to the football. And that is a big way that this Eagles team can kill you, because the Eagles can just grind you down to the point where you're not able to stop them. Saquon Barkley keeps running the ball, and that keeps the clock moving, as well as Kenny Gainwell getting into the mix there, keeping the clock moving, making you have to contend with a lot on the field. And there were a lot of times when both of those players had to make something out of nothing. There were a number of times where Saquon Barkley looked like he was going to get tackled in the backfield and then turned around and was able to get a couple of yards on whatever carry that he was doing. Same thing with Kenny Gainwell. Same thing with Jalen Hurts, too. That's a really important thing to keep your eye on as you're moving into these last couple of weeks of the season. But also credit where credit is due, too, because the Eagles were able to take significant advantage of a bad pass defense by the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Steelers were noticeably worse going into this game in the pass defensive spot than they were in the run defensive spot. All of the receivers had really great nights, particularly Devontae Smith, who had a career-high 11 receptions in the game, 109 yards through the air, a touchdown of his own. A.J. Brown was also very much in the mix, 8 catches on 11 targets for 110 yards and a touchdown. The Eagles' offensive game plan worked. And despite the early mistakes in that first quarter, the Eagles' offense was able to rebound from those and was able to turn its play around and be able to make sure that this game was well out of reach of the Steelers as the game progressed. And when it came time to it, turning to the run game, turning to churning the clock, turning to wearing this game down. Those 10 minutes definitely did not feel like 10 minutes as we were watching it live. And again, a huge credit to the Eagles defense for keeping this team in the game. I can't stress enough how important it is that on the first 5 drives of the game, the only drive that the Pittsburgh Steelers had that went more than 3 plays was a 4-play drive following the Cooper DeJean punt fumble. The Pittsburgh Steelers technically had 4 plays, but that 4th play was the field goal that put them on the board in the first quarter. So for the Eagles offense to be making a mistake that turns the ball over, that forces the defense to come out there and try to cover for that mistake, and then the Eagles special teams goes out and makes a mistake, and the Eagles defense has to cover for that mistake too, that's a big feather in the Eagles defense's cap. So huge props to them on that. And that reflected in the stats as well. Russell Wilson, 14 for 22 on the day, 128 yards, 1 touchdown. And I would also point out that Russell Wilson got sacked twice in the game, 21 yards. Najee Harris, 6 carries for 14 yards. Russell Wilson had 4 carries of his own for 13 yards. The Eagles defense also got a turnover in the game, too. The Eagles defense capitalized on a bad throw between Russell Wilson and Najee Harris. That meant that the ball was live. Darius Slay fell on top of it, and it was just a really heads-up play there. The Eagles defense was cooking today. Now, as always, there are some things to work on, and going back to those fumbles, that's a really obvious area to work on. The Philadelphia Eagles fumbled the ball twice. That resulted in turnovers, so the Eagles were technically -1 in the turnover department. Jalen Hurts fumbled as the Eagles were driving into Pittsburgh territory. That set up a 3-and-out. Then the Steelers punt the ball, and Cooper DeJean fumbles on the punt return. And that set up the Pittsburgh Steelers field goal. Those are opportunities to clean up. Those are opportunities to improve going forward. And then you also consider the fact that Jalen Hurts was sacked 3 times, which cost the Eagles 20 yards. Some of those sacks were avoidable. So this was one of those things where Jalen Hurts does need to tighten up that internal clock just a little bit. He did show it much better today. And fortunately, the Eagles receivers were getting open in ways that he was able to capitalize on it. My other concern is the Philadelphia Eagles, at times, come out of the locker room on the wrong foot. They don't come out putting the pedal to the metal, so to speak. And that was a little bit evident towards the beginning of the game, where the Philadelphia Eagles had a 7-play, 54-yard drive, took 3 minutes and 33 seconds, ended in a field goal. But the drive that's going to warrant a little bit more criticism from me is the drive coming out of halftime, the first drive of the third quarter. The Philadelphia Eagles were able to put together a 13-play, 7-minute, 8-second drive, went 52 yards, but the Eagles wound up having to settle for a field goal, and it should have been a 10-play drive. However, Pittsburgh Steelers defender Montravius Adams was called for unnecessary roughness after making contact with long snapper Rick Lovato in the head-neck area, which referee Alan Eck explained to Pro Football Writers of America pool reporter Zach Berman is in fact illegal because the long snapper is considered a defenseless player. So that resulted in the 15-yard penalty that gave the Eagles an automatic first down. It gave them a couple extra plays, but the drive still fizzled out. So the Eagles had that extra opportunity to be able to punch it into the end zone. They had the ball at the Steelers' 15-yard line, and they wound up going backwards. It wasn't great. But on the whole, you could tell that the Philadelphia Eagles were on the same page this week, especially when you look at last week's victory over the Carolina Panthers, where there were many instances when the Eagles were not on the same page. Nick Sirianni actually addressed that in his post-game press conference.
That was pretty good. Yeah, it was pretty good. I thought Jalen did a great job of taking what the defense gave him. Getting a ball to our, we had 200-yard receivers. I always think that's cool when that happens. And Jalen was in complete control. Just another good day by him. Yeah, good.
And you can tell when the Philadelphia Eagles team is clicking. You can tell when the Philadelphia Eagles team is firing on all cylinders. And when they are, it's an incredibly fun team to watch. Because they enjoy themselves, they enjoy playing with each other. But when it's time to get to work, you know they're going to deliver results. The Philadelphia Eagles are done facing other teams. It is now time for the divisional opponents. The Eagles play Washington next week. The Eagles have the division on the line. If the Eagles continue in their ways, they have a good shot at the number 1 seed after the Detroit Lions lost to the Bills today. The Eagles need losses from both the Lions and the Vikings over the course of the next couple of weeks in order to really take that number 1 seed in the NFC. But first, they have to get through the division once more. And if the Philadelphia Eagles play like they played today against the Washington Commanders next week, a team that has the propensity to be really annoying for this Philadelphia Eagles team, the Philadelphia Eagles will be the NFC East champions. But as always, let me know what you think in the comments below. What were your thoughts about this game? What stood out to you? What really excites you about this game? Any areas of improvement? Let me know. And thank you so much to everybody for tuning in to the Bird's Nest Podcast. You can support the Bird's Nest Podcast by liking and subscribing to Bird's Nest Media right here on YouTube, as well as by sharing to your social media pages. You can also find us on SoundCloud, iTunes, Amazon Podcasts, Spotify, and the Odyssey app. Please visit birdsnestmedia.com for additional Eagles and NFL coverage, and if you feel so inclined to support us in a different way, you can find the link to our Patreon in the description below, or at birdsnestmedia.com. Thank you so much for tuning in, and let's go Eagles!